Good evening and welcome to the Scrutiny Committee meeting, Corporate Performance and Budget Scrutiny, I should say. This council has two scrutiny committees. I'm Councillor Pete Pillinger, I'm chair of the committee. We have committee members in the Civic Centre along with officer support. The meeting is being live streamed via YouTube and will be available on the council's website. One of the committee members, Councillor Jane Bell, is joining us by Teams. Some housekeeping for those who are here in the Civic Centre. There are no fire drills expected, and if the alarm goes off, please leave by the emergency exits at the back of the room. Congregate in the car park. Please turn your mobile phones onto silent and your microphone off when not speaking. For those joining us via Microsoft Teams, please remain muted and indicate at the appropriate time when you would like to speak, and I will bring you in. So we move on to the agenda. Are there any apologies for absence?
Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Bell, but she's actually dialed in on Teams.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest from committee members? No. Thank you. The minutes of the last meeting have been circulated. Are they correct, and may I sign them as correct? Would you please show your approval? Thank you very much. Thank you. So we have some updates of matters that have come to us previously. We've not invited anyone for this business. We will note any queries and get answers for the next meeting. The final recommendation on page 23 has not been accepted. We might discuss whether that is something we want to take up. Are you happy with the report in general? Councillor Deborah Ashton.
I was just wafting my arm, sorry, I would have.
So on the final line on page 23, the response has been that a list of job vacancies would not be the best way of providing that. There was a list circulated to us after the last meeting. I don't know whether Councillor Tomlinson would have anything to say on this, but this was us asking whether there was a list of vacancies current that could be updated for us, whether the council keeps such a thing, and clearly the cabinet has says we don't accept that a list of outstanding job vacancies.
And yeah, that wasn't me. No, as you can see, we used to provide a list of vacancies to the committee on a regular basis. I think you can see the explanation there, certainly around shared services, makes it a little more challenging. I'm loath to answer the question, frankly, because it wasn't me that provided the response.
No.
And perhaps you could write to the cabinet member responsible and they could give you a bit more of the context.
Sorry to jump something on you, but since you were
I'm used to it.
Yep. Do committee meetings members have any thoughts about this? Councillor Green?
It's more of a general point. Thanks, Chairman. It was just a general point on the responses. More generally speaking, I just think it's probably a need for them to be a bit more robust moving forwards. I mean, we take up valuable time of cabinet members and senior officers of the council and obviously committee colleagues in scrutinising items, with the very reason for doing that is to add value. And I think sometimes the responses don't quite add enough detail for us to be able to build on that as a council to improve services moving forward. I think if anything could be done to strengthen those responses, I think that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Howarth.
He's not going to like me for this, but Councillor Tomlinson just said perhaps we should ask the cabinet member, who I believe is finance and assets, who is sitting immediately behind him.
Do you have any comments, Councillor?
Thanks, Chair. I didn't want to butt in. I did speak to Neil about this, and I think we did raise it at the cabinet meeting around maybe the old way of it being done wasn't the most efficient use of officer time to do it. My understanding is that a different version from HR, which is kind of processed automatically out of the HR system, has been circulated. I think, we're open ears if that document either needs to be recirculated or the committee have got feedback on that document, then we can look at ways to see what extra information you require could be incorporated into it.
Thank you. It's from members of Deborah Ashton, Councillor.
Yeah, it's just, it's probably I've missed it on the way through, but that information that you just mentioned, where was it circulated? Where would we find it? Because, as I say, it's passed me by. That's not to say I haven't had it, but I haven't noticed it.
I'm not too sure, but I'm sure Darren and Neil can work to recirculate it.
Chair, was sent within a few days of the last meeting to members. And just to pick up on Councillor Michael Green's point around the robustness, we will take it back and we'll present an updated version for the next meeting. Thank you, Chair.
I think my request on this one would be whether if members if we could have a copy of that equivalent document after this meeting, we would then look at the two that we've received and see whether they meet our needs. It would be easier for us if those figures were available for our agenda for a meeting rather than as a response to the previous meeting, if that makes sense. Could you look at that for us? Thank you. And so we have some lines of question. We welcome the leader of the council, Councillor Matthew Tomlinson, and we welcome Caroline Wolfenden to the meeting, who is Director of Change and Delivery. And we have the report on the performance monitoring for Q1. For those of you who are listening online, the council regularly monitors its own performance. This is part of our routine matters for the council. And we as Scrutiny look at that monitoring and add an extra line of question, because it's important that members of the public are aware that we do have a rigorous scrutiny of all the matters that the council takes part in, because we're spending the money of people who elect us and we're doing work for you. So it's right that we should be rigorous in our scrutiny of what goes on in the council. Thank you. One of the big issues that's coming up, and presumably ought to be in the mindset of anybody doing corporate planning, is local government reorganisation. Could you provide us with an update on local government reorganisation and how Scrutiny might be involved in the future?
Thank you. It's perhaps opportune that you raised that, because I know that the LGA have been putting some guidance out about how Scrutiny can be involved, and I've no doubt you're very much across that, and we will have to put something in the agenda. Members will recall that at our last meeting before we broke up for the summer, the council agreed its preferred option for what local government reorganisation might look like in Lancashire if it goes ahead. So we've now joined with 5 other councils who are like-minded, and we've appointed the government. Right. Forgive me. I'll try and put my thoughts in some order. So,
if I could just say to you, members of the public might not know the background, I'm really grateful that you're taking the trouble to go back up.
So, and there is a video on the council's website and social medias featuring yours truly trying to explain it and why it's all happening. You can have a look and decide for yourself how well I've done that. So we've got the government was really keen that all councils, no matter what the views, were working to a single set of data to inform the view. So between us all, we've appointed a consultant to come up with a load of data, and now we're all using that to try and use that data to justify what we want. There's 6 of us who've signed up and agreed to the plan that went through our council. The consultants have now provided us with that data. At this stage, that's not ready to be shared with the public, but I'm relatively pleased with how that data looks when comparing it to other options. So we will be having a special council meeting because the government now wants us to put our official submission in by the 28th of November. We do have a council meeting in November, but if we're ready, I would like us to discuss it again as a council before that, so we can thrash out any differences we might have. But technically, the decision to submit the final report, and this has been tested by brighter people than me, is apparently an executive decision, not a council decision. So that means it's a cabinet decision. But I'll give my commitment that we will have a council debate first, and that will then inform the cabinet's decision. But certainly there should be a role in scrutiny in that. Once the report's ready to be submitted, you can test it, you can ask any questions. But I think we might have to be a bit fluid about meetings because the timescale that the government have put on us is very tight. Well, it is in local government terms, the cycle of meetings that we have. So we might have to discuss having a separate meeting just to look at that, which, I'd welcome, as I've said before, anything that we put in, the more tests it can go through, then the stronger it'll be when it finally gets submitted.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilkie.
So on the report, I've got on page 26, paragraph 9, we've got on there that 55% of the corporate strategy measures are in green. Are you comfortable with 45% not measuring green, and what percentage not in green do you think would be acceptable?
Sorry, I did have a preamble, but so you've thrown me a bit.
My apologies.
It's fine.
No, my apologies. I shouldn't have passed on. Would you like to say anything about this report to us before we start the question?
I was going to welcome the fact that the corporate strategy projects, 16 are green and 2 are amber, and there's no reds in there, so let's all celebrate those first of all. In those, we've got the local plan submitted now and being examined. That's always a big issue for the council as a whole, but especially for those involved in planning. We had the official opening of Jubilee Gardens, which I'm sure is a cause for celebration for us all. There is a tweet on, as you'll know, we've been on with over £3 million worth of refurbishments for the leisure centres. I believe in your report it said they'll be completed by the end of September. That's not strictly true. We've had some feedback from members about disability adaptations. All the work that was done was completely DDA compliant, as you would expect. But we have had a couple of requests from members to look at further works that can be done. And we've agreed to do those works. There is a bit of cost, but it's better to get the works done first rather than add them on after. And that's added to some delays. But Leyland will be complete by the end of this month. We would expect Bamber Bridge to be complete by the end of October, and then Penwitham by the end of the year. So it's, when you look at other councils not that far away, and the difficulties they're having with the leisure provision, for us to be investing this money in 3 leisure centres, I think is something we ought to be celebrating. And then on youth provision, there is an action plan. I can tell Scrutiny that we're in the very early days of talking to Onside, who provide the youth zones in Chorley, about to be one in Preston and one in Blackburn, about doing some satellite work in South Ribble. I don't think we're at the stage where we can say we can build a youth zone in the borough, but they are really keen to get out and do outreach work. And so we're talking to them about a couple of places where we've got antisocial behaviour that could be addressed by the work that they do. They have things like it's called the Scran van, and basically it offers free hot food out of the back of a van to kids. Be amazed how many kids will come for free hot food. And so we are working with those. So I did want to highlight that, and we'll see where that leads us to. It's very early days, but we could be. Who knows? We'll leave that one. Moving on, I think there's a couple of other things I do want to highlight, and I will mention some of the things that aren't as positive, because I think I should, but I do want to celebrate those that are positive. Our homelessness service are doing a great job and doing some really sterling work with people before they become homeless. You remember probably a couple of years ago, we had some real problems with the rate and the numbers of homelessness that cost us, hundreds of thousands of pounds. We're now working much more proactively, trying to get in with people who are at risk of becoming homeless. And you'll see from the report, 62% who present to us at risk are then prevented from being homeless. And I think that proactive work early is really, really important. And a couple of the other positive things, the percentage of households living in fuel poverty is really low in South Ribble. And some of that is directly attributed to the work we've done, rolling out government schemes around insulation and things like that. But I think we should be really, really pleased with that. And we're delivering affordable homes faster than we have done more recently. So again, some really positive news. We've got challenges. Of course, we've got challenges. And some of the things that we've not delivered as quickly as we'd like. The participatory democracy project has stalled because of staff changes, but I know that the scrutiny committee are doing some work around that, and I think I'm coming to talk to them in a fortnight's time. So we do want to get on with that, but we have to acknowledge we're not moving as quickly as we would like. And then the economic partnership, again, there's been a number of staff changes, but we're working with the South Ribble Partnership on that and making sure we're talking to the right people. And I know that the senior management team are meeting this week to drive progress forward with that. Customer satisfaction, it's always one that's a challenge to us. Whilst we're not achieving our target, we are up on last year and things are moving in the right direction. So again, not quite where we want to be, but we're making all the right moves. A couple of other challenges that we really want to acknowledge: the number of residents participating in activities that we deliver. We've actually changed the way we measure that. And so I've suggested that actually if we're changing the way we measure it, perhaps we ought to be changing the target as well. So perhaps we'll be reporting on a different target next time. But we used to measure the number of residents who engaged in anything that we'd had anything to do with, and now it's a much more specific target about residents who engage in things that we are actually doing ourselves. And then the well-being score again. So people who engage with us, there's a matrix by which we ask questions at the beginning when they come to us, how are you feeling, and that gives them a score. We would like to increase the score by 2 points, and I'm sure Caroline can give you chapter and verse how that works. At the moment, 90% of people are saying we do improve the feeling of well-being. but not by the 2 points that we'd like. So again, good stuff being done. Again, we perhaps need to look at how we measure that, or whether we change the target. I think, the number of business engagements. We used to use an organisation called Boost that was an LCC organisation that at very short notice ceased to exist. So we can't use Boost anymore for the business engagement stuff. So we're engaging with Growth Lancashire to try and deliver that service for us. So hopefully we'll see those figures improve very quickly. I think that's all I want to say. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember what Councillor King's question was, so I'm sure he can ask it.
We'll come back to the question.
Yeah.
Just to say that some of the things you have already said are answers to questions that we had planned to ask. We probably will still ask them, but you'll be able to say, I refer you back to my opening comments. Councillor Wilking.
Yes, but paragraph 26, sorry, page 26, paragraph 9, 55% of the corporate strategy measures are green. Are you comfortable that 45% of the measures are not measuring green, and what percentage not in green do you think would be acceptable?
I don't think having any not in green is acceptable. I want them all to be green. Clearly that figure, some of the ones that aren't green are either not due to be reported yet, or in amber, so it means we are making progress. But it's certainly not the case that the ones aren't green are red. That is not the case. We're making progress, as I've said, on nearly all of the projects. I think it's a very pleasing report, and it just shows the range of things that we are involved in, and the progress that we're making. I'm as pushy as anybody, and I want them to be all green, but I'm also a realist, and we're never going to get them all in green. But we continue to do what we can. And I could just come back to the fact, I think it's a really, really pleasing report. And I was really encouraged when the report landed on my desk. I think it's a good report.
Thank you. Councillor David Bollenberg. Is that not you? Pardon? Have I got the wrong person down? Okay, so David, on page, Councillor David Howarth, point 4. What was that you asking that? I'm sorry, I've got the wrong name down probably on my list, but.
Case on page 28, paragraph 21, delivery of the Lancashire local plan. Please could you talk us through why this has been marked as complete, as there is some way to go to get the local plan finalised and ready for implementation?
I think what we were measuring was us developing the plan so that it was ready to be submitted for consideration. And I think that's where we're up to. Anybody who knows these things, they take a long time and it bounces backwards and forwards. But what we're measuring is where we thought we would be at this stage. And so we're not saying that there is no more work to do on the local plan. What we're saying is this is where we thought we would be. So when we measure it, it's a green indicator. It's frowning.
Microphone on there. So we're not where we thought we would be then.
I think I said we are where we thought we would be, and that's why we're saying it's green.
Are you happy? Councillor Wilking.
Yeah, so this is one of the ones where you have already answered my question. But on page 28, paragraph 22, I guess for next time, because one of the questions that I did have was, what are some of these? They look newish to me. If for the next time we meet, we're able to get some context that you've run through behind it, then that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I apologise if I've spiked some people's guns, but maybe that's what my preamble is all about.
I think we're very glad that you spike guns because it shows that you're doing the job properly. I mean, our job is to pick up things and help you to do the job properly. And if you're already doing it, I know you have been chair of scrutiny yourself, so you understand the scrutiny process. So I think that comes into your leadership of the council, which is good and helpful. David Bollenberg, we're on to point 6.
Hi. If I could just refer you to page 30, paragraph 29, it's about the great work that you've done in preventing households becoming homeless. We do note that there are 38% still remaining for you to reach. What are the plans to reach that nearly 40% of people not yet reached to prevent them becoming homeless?
I'm really sorry, I've lost you on the report. Can you just tell me where we are again?
Sorry, it's page 30, paragraph 29. I probably missed that and jumped forward.
And I'm looking at the wrong thing. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, with you now. I mean, we've discussed homelessness and the challenge it presents to local families and to this council before. This is about the pre-work that we do when people present that they are at risk of becoming homeless. So this is before the homeless. And I think it's a great credit that, 62% of those people, they then don't become homeless. Obviously, for some people, we're still getting no-fault evictions. We're still getting family breakups. And we know that for many families, homelessness comes at the end of a complicated and complex life story, really. So I don't think we'll ever get to a stage where our teams can stop everybody who presents from becoming homeless. It's what we do with people then that then becomes really important. I think I'm right in saying at the moment we've got 13 families in bed and breakfast. In my view, that's 13 too many. It's hugely expensive, and we've asked our housing team to look at alternative solutions to that. It seems to have become almost the de rigueur that councils will use B&Bs, and I'm asking for people to perhaps look at this a bit differently. If I tell you that the average family in a B&B costs £1,000 a week to house, that's incredibly expensive provision in my view, and there has to be a better way, and we've got people looking at better ways.
I completely understand it. It's terrible to spend that much money when there may be better solutions. But the question is specifically about preventing them becoming homeless, and I want to know how we're going to get that 38% down.
If Jennifer Mullin was here, I'm sure she could give you a better answer that I can. I don't know if you feel
Could we ask for a written?
Yeah, I'll get you a written response from the director responsible.
Thank you very much. Michael Green, Councillor Michael Green.
Thanks, Chairman. Evening, Councillor Thomas, and evening, Caroline. If I could take you down to the next paragraph on the same page 30, so paragraph 30. And you're making reference to actively supporting business growth and workforce development, which is to be applauded. But please, could you talk us through some of the activities which are taking place, and how do you measure success?
So there are a range. I mean, I did describe some of the things that we're struggling to do at the moment, just because we've been using other providers to it. But you'll know we have our apprentice schools, and we have DWP in here promoting work. I didn't come to the last one, but if people come to the jobs fairs that we do here, they're really popular. Obviously, through Michelle Horrocks, who is our, we share with Chorley around economic development. They're really well tied in. We've got some really exciting activities. coming in South Ribble for job creation and economic development, some of which are not within our control. The Kewarden development, as we know, enormous potential for South Ribble, but not within our control. Then we've got the cyber force coming, the enterprise zone, who we work with very closely. So we're in a very fortunate position. We're in a very fortunate position in South Ribble. Let's be honest, some of that is just because of our geography. We are at the heart of the county, but also we've got a real good backstory going back years in South Ribble. If when Leyland Motors closed down in the early 90s, you would have said that South Ribble 30 years later would have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the county. I think people would not have believed that could be possible, and yet it is. And that's not because of politics with a big P at all. This council has a long tradition of working really closely, and the number of small businesses that are thriving around here is testament to that work.
Councillor Ashton.
I'm going slightly out of order in terms of the paperwork, but there's an item on page 32 about the economic partnership, and that's currently rated amber, and it just feels like we've got a few threads around economic development in different places in the report. There's another one which I can't find immediately around UK SPF and what we're intending doing about that in terms of business development. And I'm new to the committee, so it may be that you have had an overview of of everything that's going on in terms of economic development. But I'm just, the partnership was the bit that caught my eye, because I was wondering why. I mean, you've answered some of it again, I think, earlier on, but why we've got that delay when a large part of it is within the control of two willing partners in a way. I know you've got external parties involved, and I guess, I'm only guessing, but local government reorganisation is not going to help, because that's going to muddy the waters again, but can only work with what we've got.
Well, I actually think that local government reorganisation might be helpful in this, because then it's not two councils looking at each other and saying, what are you doing about this, and which bit's our responsibility and which bit's yours. And certainly, if you look at the Kewarden site and the enterprise zone, whatever happens with local government reorganisation, they'll be part of the new council, because they're already within South Ribble. But we won't be relying on Lancashire County Council so much to do, we ask, sometimes we're in a place of we're working together and asking people to help. And sometimes it's not exactly what we would like, and a single tier of government might be helpful in that regard.
Councillor Green.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Thanks for your earlier response, Councillor Tomlinson. And I think the fact that we've got an high employment rate is something of which we can all be proud. But I think you've alluded to what I wanted to ask in the supplementary. So whilst we can be proud of what is happening locally, how can we be sure that we are actually adding value as a council? And is the good employment rate despite what the council's doing, or is it in part at least because of what the council's doing? How can we actually measure that, whether we are actually having a tangible difference?
Over to you, Caroline.
I mean, obviously, it's a difficult one to measure, because there's so many factors, isn't there, that influence people like being in work. But I think, we do have a really strong programme in terms of, supporting people into employment. I think in terms of like what we do around the programme, is we're having those regular conversations like with businesses to understand what actually skills they need. So obviously in terms of like the programme that we're delivering as part of UK SPF is very much focused on ensuring that we're training people, we're upskilling people into to obviously like move into sort of like employment opportunities in the borough. So it's very evidence based is what I would say in terms of like the programme, but it obviously is difficult to measure, but we do keep obviously a watching brief in terms of like the employment figure, but obviously in terms of the activity that we're doing, obviously there's lots of other activity and lots of other influencing factors.
Thank you. Councillor Bollenberg, you have a point on page point 8 on the...
Thank you. If I could take you forward to page 32, and the first of the two measures on page 32, which is develop and deliver a participatory democracy project. I've got two questions on this. I'm interested to know how we've got ourselves in a position where the budget doesn't cover the costs, what work was done around scoping the budget that would be needed for this, and how we've got it, how we're going to learn from that. And then second to that, you mentioned the digital platforms and facilitation tools, and I'm wondering how they will interface with the People's Assembly project to actually achieve the aims of this measure, which is the participatory democracy project.
Yeah, and I'm sure if the deputy leader was here, she'd be able to give you chapter and verse on this, because it's a project that she's passionate about. And I'm afraid I can't give you chapter and verse. Can you be helpful?
I can't give chapter and verse. Sorry. I can't give chapter and verse. But obviously what I would say is that there were different elements to the project that were obviously like being scoped, the People's Assembly being one of them. And obviously we do a lot of like digital engagement anyway, but the whole point of this project was like looking how we could perhaps do things differently. Obviously some people, you know, potentially could be digitally excluded from our consultation and engagement processes. So it was obviously looking at those like different like options. As it turns out, obviously one of the options that potentially could have been on the table around the People's Assembly is it can be quite expensive. So we are looking like at alternatives. So, you know, there is still that opportunity to engage in different ways outside of digital platforms like on the table. It's just obviously working through what that might look like instead of the People's Assembly, which is obviously quite costly.
Thank you. And another subsidiary, we have legislation going through that will reduce the minimum voting age to 16. Has the Cabinet considered or started to consider yet how we would work with those aged maybe 14 plus at the moment to ensure their participation in our democracy?
So I've been discussing this with a number of people actually, and you'll be aware that next week we're opening our new council chamber, and in October it's Local Democracy Week. Now traditionally, if we've had enough members interested, we've got primary schools in to do mock debates historically on subjects that interest them. And they've been nice, and they've been, you know, a lovely thing to do, and they've resulted in some nice pictures with the mayor. But this time we are particularly going to focus on secondary school pupils, and we're going to try and pick subjects which are a bit more about what local democracy means. I've also been speaking to our MP about this. He's really keen to get into schools to talk to year 10s and 11s about what, you know, we don't do civics in schools, do we? Not like, certainly I would like us to do anyway. And so it is a whole new, literally it's a whole new demographic who are going to be given the right to vote. And then there's another week in February. I can't remember what that's called. It's another democracy week. It's not Local Democracy Week, but it's another one. And then again, we're looking to get more secondary school pupils in to get used to what the council chamber likes, how debate works, why it's important to get involved, what local government does as opposed to Parliament, and all those things. So we'll be doing our bit, I think.
This is not an answer for you, but with the death of the gentleman in the United States this last week, his work, particularly with younger men over social media, might make us think about the ways in which we wish to communicate with our electorate, particularly that younger age range?
Yeah, I'm quite terrified by it all, really. Both where it can lead to, but also the challenges that it brings to us. Because clearly young people engage with each other and the world in a very different way than many of us do. I have to hold my hands up. I'd never heard of this chap before, but if you're that age and you're on TikTok, you have heard of him. So we do need to think about how we reach out to younger people differently.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Having worked with young people for many years, and when they're 16, I don't mean to be unkind, but they are not interested in politics. They're interested in getting a new bike or a new girlfriend or sex or whatever. So you have to be very, very careful and very sort of experienced of talking to young people. I found when I first joined the council that most councillors were terrified of youngsters. They were terrified of teenagers. They thought they were all bad and horrible. They had no idea how to approach them. So I think if we're going to go into schools, we've got to go in with people who are used to talking to young people, who will not talk down to them and will talk in their language and listen to what they have to say. It will take them a long time to formulate their views, but once they do, they will stick to them. And it will be very difficult for us to change their minds if they follow the gentleman in America. I watched that and was very, very saddened and personally very cross, because I have a grandson in university in America, and God help us if he's been listening. But I feel we've got to have people who know what they're doing, and know how to talk to 15, 16-year-olds, because they're and particularly we need to be very much digitally savage. Savage is the right word, I think. But we really do need to know what we're doing when we're touching a button on a machine and what we're saying and how because it spreads like wildfire. But that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Comments? No. We can move on then to Councillor Will King.
Thank you. So can I take you to page 33 on customer satisfaction? So I have got 4 questions for you here, so we'll take them one by one, which is we have seen a bit of an improvement. However, we are still tracking below where we would want to be in terms of our performance to date. The customer satisfaction being below target, I can see that you're looking at improving the methodology for collecting data, but what are you doing to actually improve the customer satisfaction and respond to customers' feedback?
And I think I raised this at the last performance scrutiny meeting. I'm firm in my view that the more people we get to respond, then the more realistic the measure is. And I'm also firm in my view, the more people we get to respond, the better the result will be. Because it is only my view, and we'll test it by getting more people to reply. But my view is that the vast majority of people who are satisfied with a straightforward interaction with the council don't reply to, if somebody engages with us, then they're invited to respond to a survey. Now I know in my experience, if I engage with my bank or my internet provider online and it all goes okay, and then they invite me to take part in a survey, I don't. If it doesn't go well, I do. And I think that's just human nature. And I understand why that happens. So we've been talking to ASIM about how we encourage more and more people to engage. Now, the proof of the pudding to my theory about that will improve the figure the proof of that will be in the proof of that pudding will be in the eating. But I raised it last time, and I know Asim's on with it. But we need to get more people to respond, because if you look at the figures, the number of people who actually engage in that are quite small.
The issue I have is that increasing the number of people commenting on our performance isn't really an action plan of how to improve our performance. I've seen that in terms of the plan, let's include a prize draw for survey participants. Your results may get better from the back of that, because I personally would view the council higher if I had an opportunity to win 100 quid from the back of filling out a survey, but that isn't actually addressing the core problem. So is there anything outside of just getting people to participate to actually change the fundamental problem that people are facing?
I disagree. I actually disagree. So what we're measuring here is the people who reply. So we're not measuring performance here. We're measuring the people who reply to say they're satisfied with their interactions with the council. And I remain firmly of the view that a lot of people who are quite happy with their interaction with the council, whether it's renewing the brown bin or reporting, some grass that needs cutting, that the ones who are satisfied are less likely to respond to a survey. And so if we can get those people to respond, that figure, I think, will go up. Now, that will be a better reflection of the performance that we've got. So I don't think that this figure is saying we're not performing well. I think, and again, and I said in my earlier response, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I think that this is that people tend to be more likely to take part in a survey when they're unhappy with the service that we've got. So the higher up we can drive participation, I think that figure will improve. And if I'm wrong, I'll happily come back and admit it.
So I'm not going to labour the point, but if we were measuring how many people are responding to a customer survey, I would be aligned with you. The indicator is customers satisfied with the service of council. And when we go down to the final paragraph, it says that, and this is on page 34, then 8.7% of complaint outcomes found that the council was at fault. So those 8.7%, addressing the number of people who sign up to a survey doesn't do anything about that, does it? So what is it that we're actually doing on that very point?
And I think those people are the ones we ought to be concentrating on. So I absolutely get that and accept that point. If people are complaining and then we are finding that we are at fault, then that's where we learn. And that's why it's important that we do these things. I've worked in other organisations where you're really keen on where I work, what we call customer complaints. But I think you've got to get in customer compliments as well. But there's no point collecting customer complaints if then you don't do anything about it, because that's surely that's the point. It's no good just saying come and complain and tell us what we're doing wrong unless you're learning from that and improving. So I think I apologise for not perhaps addressing your original point, but yeah, that's how we've got to learn. Let's see what as we drive the numbers up, let's see what the percentage figure looks like.
No problem. So I think one thing, if we can take from this, is if we can see some sort of plan to address that percentage of people that are unhappy and the council's at fault. The final point I had on this was to do with the target. So the target for customer satisfaction has now been returned to the 80% in line with the Customer Access Charter. I remember labouring this point in the past at this committee, saying that reducing it to 70% does not mean that we're doing better. It just means that we're not being ambitious enough. I'm happy to see that you've come in and said, you know what we'll do? We'll increase it back to the level that we said before. So I'm happy that's been taken on board. But why is it that you feel that we need to return to the 80% target when for the last year, and this may be cynical, but the plan to improve hitting our target was to reduce it.
I can't respond for others. If somebody gives me a sensible benchmark figure and says that seems to be the appropriate one, I'm always keen on us setting stretch targets. So it's no point, if you know you're going to hit 50%, it's no good setting a target at 50%. But if somebody says if we try really hard, we could reach 60%, then that's what your target should be. And so if somebody says to me, the benchmark for this is 80%, then that should be what our target is. And I'm quite happy for us to stand or fall by that.
Can I ask a subsidiary? This conversation has made me wonder whether we're actually focusing on the wrong thing with this data. The focus that we've had is on the percentage of approvals or not approvals, whereas perhaps the reason for doing these surveys is to deal with the people who have had really good experiences and leave good private, and those who've got problems, in which case we can deal with the individual problems. So rather than be a mechanism for getting a target figure, it's a mechanism for dealing with those who are having a bad experience. Would that be
I think it might be useful, and I'm prepared to get shot down by the director. What might be useful is to provide some case studies in future when we're looking at this figure, to say, look, here's one or two instances of people who weren't happy, what we learned from it, what we're changing to make it better in the future. Because as I said, it's no good just collecting complaints unless you're actually going to do something about it. I'll suggest that.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask a question? What actual numbers are we talking about as a metric rather than a percentage? Because if it's a very small number and we pick a small number out of a small number, you run a risk, don't you, of revealing more than you want to.
Yes, I'm actually glad that you've asked that question, because I was just looking at the data myself and thinking actually it probably would be useful for us to put numbers like alongside the percentages. You'll see, obviously, there is actually an additional report attached around obviously customer satisfaction, because obviously I appreciate this is a specific area of interest. And also you'll see as well that we, in the narrative, we put some information in there as well around like complaints and, satisfaction with the professionalism of the advisor, because I think what we need to take into consideration is that, customer satisfaction encompasses lots of different elements. I think, sometimes we will get people responding to the survey saying they're not satisfied because they actually didn't get the outcome that they wanted or expected. And actually, we might have given the right outcome and they just weren't happy with it. So it's always something, to sort of take into consideration around the customer satisfaction figure. And that's why we've added in a little bit more information for context, just to say, well, actually, people are happy in terms of when they're contacting the council, they think they get a good service. We can see that there are a minimal number, of complaints and dissatisfaction. Perhaps, we need to think that the customer satisfaction is more to do with the fact that people are not getting the outcome they wanted or expected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't the right outcome in terms of, the council's response.
Thank you. David Bollenberg.
Hello, if I could take you to page 35. The indicator is the number of residents participating in activities delivered by the council. And I realise this was in your opening summary. I think some of what you said actually does answer the question. Why is it so much lower than last year and expected? And you mentioned that actually this is the first quarter you're now measuring a different set of data. Could you give us more information about why would you doing that, but also what's been left out? Because one thing I know that Councillor King was going to ask, and I'll just put it in this, was about music in the park. Doesn't seem to be listed there, which would presumably boost the numbers.
So clearly, as you can see, it's a significant change. I'm going to be blunt and honest with you. I don't know why we decided to change it. Somebody else made that decision. and she's going to explain why she made that decision now.
I did not make the decision, but obviously we were previously reporting the figures to include wider initiatives that the council's not responsible for. So we support them obviously at arm's length, but it's not actually activities the council delivers directly. So in terms of obviously refining the indicator, it was much easier for us to measure and monitor that. I did have an earlier conversation with the director today, who has said that in terms of like the next quarter, we're actually expecting to see an increase because we are focused on delivering a lot more activities over the summer period in terms of like, you know, supporting like our young people. So we do actually expect for that figure to be increased for the next like quarter. And we do think we will meet the target. So I know obviously the leader had said that we might look at refining the target. We might do that if obviously we're not thinking that we're sort of getting there, but I'm advised that we think we probably will for the next reporting period. So I think we need to just keep an eye on that one.
And for music in the park?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question with regards to music in the park?
Councillor King was, and I'm shamelessly stealing his question, and Councillor King might want to jump in case I'm selling it wrong, but we didn't see music in the park in that list. Now, it could be that list's an indicative list. I don't know. It doesn't suggest one way or another. We just wonder, because presumably music in the park is something we as the council deliver. So you would have thought it would be in there, but it doesn't seem to be. But like I said, it could be an omission, or it could be an indicative list only. I don't know.
I'm obviously happy to go away and check that. I think in terms of this indicator, this is something that the communities team, so this is more around obviously like community like based activity, and it doesn't usually include like our events data, which is usually obviously like, you know, reported like separately, but I will go and just double check that and make sure that that's factually correct.
Thank you. Just a comment from the chair. When presenting data where there is a discontinuity between quarters like this, where the criteria have changed significantly, I think it would be helpful to anybody looking at the graph to actually have an indication that there isn't a downward trend as this graph shows, but a discontinuity because the criteria have changed. I think you're actually not selling yourself well on the way this is presented.
That conversation has been had, Chairman.
Councillor Ashton, you had a question you wanted to ask on page 37. Could you use your microphone, please?
I wasn't saying anything material. I was intrigued, I suppose, by the well-being score. I can't find the right page on my thing, but it doesn't matter. And what we're actually meaning by well-being. So is this people who are coming in to, for the sake of argument, social prescribing and how they feel at the point they come into that, rather than well-being in the more general sense, which is going to be very much impacted by external events. It's another one, I suppose, that's around this whole issue of how can we unpick our activities from what's happening in the rest of a person's life, I suppose, was the...
Yeah, and you'll see that there's a range of questions on themes that people get asked when they first present. So we get a measure of how they're feeling about their own well-being. And what we would like to see is after our support and interventions, we've said our target is that the score will go up by 2 points. And at the moment, almost everybody is reporting back saying it's gone up at least 1 point. So we are improving how people feel about their life by our intervention, but we're not quite at the stage our target of getting an improvement of 2 points. So again, it's something we need to work a little bit harder on. We'll always investigate whether we're measuring things in the right way, and that's why you've heard a couple of things tonight that we're changing how we measure it. But we've been clear that there is a bit more work to do on this, because at the moment we still think that that's an appropriate measure. So we need to drill down into what we can do more just to get it up. Clearly, as I say, almost everybody that comes to us on here does get an improvement in their own personal well-being, and that's something we should celebrate. But there's more to do, and we should acknowledge that, and we do. We acknowledge that in the action plan.
Thank you, David Howarth, Councillor.
Thank you. Page 47. Develop a cultural strategy. The development of the cultural strategy seems to be taking a considerable amount of time from when Scrutiny passed this to the Cabinet. So why is this, and when will the draft be available for Scrutiny to consider?
So I would push back a bit about the considerable amount of time, because these things are never easy. We've not had a cultural strategy as such before, and I know that the previous leader was really keen on getting this going. We have been engaging with a wide range of stakeholders right across the borough, and it's amazing what's going on and what you can put under culture. And I know that the Cabinet member, Councillor Farnworth, has actually been really busy on this. I think he's just about ready to get something that he can present to people, and I look forward to him doing that. And if the Scrutiny Committee are really interested in looking at that strategy when it comes forward, then I'm sure that Councillor Farnworth will be happy to bring it to you. But what it will do is it'll bring a bit of structure that hasn't perhaps existed before around how we support, small groups, big events. Whilst we've done loads of really good stuff, some of it, if we're really honest, has been a bit ad hoc. And what a strategy ought to be able to do is to say to our residents who are engaging in that kind of activity, this is what we're about as a council, this is what you can expect from us, and this is what we're trying to achieve. So it'll be the first time, to be fair, it'll be the first time we've had a cultural strategy. And I think I've said to this committee before, coming out of COVID, I think it's something that I've become more and more interested in as South Ribble becomes much more involved in place shaping rather than just delivering services. I think I admitted before COVID, and so that's quite a long time I was on this council, I was all about service delivery and doing the things we have to do and doing them well. And now I've gone a bit more cuddly in my old age, and I want us to do those things that make South Ribble a great place to live, work, play and do business. Nice bit of corporate finish there. Do you like that? But seriously, I think, as I say, Councillor Farnworth's been doing a lot of work over the spring and summer, and I know I talked to him about it only a couple of days ago, and he's confident that in very short period of time he'll be able to bring something, and so Scrutiny can obviously be as involved in that as it likes.
Can I, from the chair, make a point? This happened under my predecessor and under your predecessor, but Scrutiny was halfway through a work group and had the work taken off us. We might well have been further ahead now had that work completed with the Scrutiny work group to be taken over by the Cabinet when we reported, rather than starting from scratch again. But that's just a comment looking backwards about ways of working between parts of the council. Thank you. David Howarth's got another question, I think.
You're pleased to know this is the last one as well. However, I am now one of these statistics. So on page 68, paragraph 8, please could you clarify this? If we received 25,145 calls and 19,193 were answered, 5,952 callers did not get their call answered. And you can make that 5,953 now. Why was that? And if I can just add a couple of other questions. The average call wait time is below target and higher than it has been for a couple of years, with anecdotal feedback from our residents that it can be longer than this to get through. The trend appears to be Q1 having significantly more calls. Why wasn't this anticipated again this year and capacity put in place? And just one further one, paragraph 17A and 18A refer to Chorley Council. Shouldn't that be South Ribble?
Okay, so I apologise on behalf of the staff for that. I am told by colleagues at Chorley that sometimes they get stuff through that says South Ribble in. So apparently it depends. If you're a shared services member of staff who's writing these reports, you will have a South Ribble email address and you will also have a Chorley email address. And depending on which one you're working in, it automatically populates this. But I've suggested a simple word search before you publish the document might help, because clearly very few of our documents should include the word Chorley. So yeah, I'll pass that on. Do you want to try and answer the questions about the calls?
I can.
Okay, we're going to have to. Obviously, there's a lot in there, and I'm not in a place where I feel I can give you a proper answer. So I much prefer to get you a written one.
Okay, more than happy for you to take that away. But as one of the latest statistics, I tried to get a car park pass last week and was asked for various details. And then it said, if you need any help, phone 625 625 and ask for parking services, which I did. And 5 minutes later, I just gave up. And the public don't have access to democratic services like we do. So if you're a member of the public, that's got to be really frustrating. And it happens far too often.
Okay, point taken, and we'll get you a written report.
Thank you. Councillor Bell, you wish to speak. Was it on the cultural strategy, in which case we've moved on, I'm afraid. Would you be happy to have a conversation with me afterwards? Or do you wish, I mean, we've moved on to another bit of business, so.
It's just about well-being and the cultural strategy and its connection to COVID, in that kept everybody sane. That was the point I wanted to make. Okay, fine.
Thank you. What point about COVID and what happened there?
And the fact it kept everybody's well-being and a lot of people saying, you know, all the cultural stuff that went on, whether you were making things or singing or playing music or whatever. The cultural stuff that we do in South Ribble is very much joined up to our well-being and our mental health. So we must never forget that when we're looking at strategies in its widest sense.
Point well made, thank you. Are there any questions from members who are here who are not on the committee? And there are no members of the public. Well, thank you to both Caroline Wolfenden and to Matthew Tomlinson for your contributions. We had quite a lot of questions on that, but I hope it's been helpful to you. And there's a few items which you promised to get back to us on, and we'll be look forward to the extra information. Thank you for your presence. Before we introduce the next member of the Cabinet, we need to formulate our recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Some of the themes from tonight's meeting that the committee might like to make as a recommendation. The committee thanks the leader and director for attending and answering questions. The committee commends the progress and performance made of the council in the first quarter, and in particular Jubilee Gardens and the work tackling homelessness. The committee welcomes the commitment of the council's local government reorganisation submission being presented to scrutiny prior to finalisation. The committee is grateful for the offer of further information on homelessness prevention. The committee supports the leader in encouraging customers to complete the feedback forms and looks forward to future reports, including how we are responding to the feedback and improving customer service by way of case study. The committee asks that the definition of the number of residents' participation in activities delivered by the council indicator being reviewed and clarified. The committee looks forward to seeing a copy of the draft cultural strategy. And finally, the committee is grateful for the offer of more detailed information being provided on call waiting times. Thank you, Chair.
Is the committee happy with those? Thank you very much. Thank you, to Darren. We welcome Councillor Wes Roberts, who is the Cabinet Member for Finance and Assets, who will present this report and is supported by Neil Hulton, who is Director of Finance. Thank you for being with us. First time for you, Councillor Roberts? Second. Thank you. You have some opportunity to say a few words of introduction.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, second time at committee. Thank you. First time with Councillor King and Councillor Ashton. So good to be here. Look forward to hearing your views on and questions on the report. Just a few highlights from me. So this is the revenue and reserves position of the council as of 31st of July. And you'll see that we do outline it at the end of the year. We'd expect an overspend of around £250,000. We do anticipate that coming down slightly as we progress through the quarters. And get a bit more clarity on the figures. We also anticipate that if that overspend probably went up a little, down a little bit, we'd have general reserves at around 5 million, which is healthy for the organisation. Point 16 just highlights partly the good work that Neil's done in terms of predicting what the pay offer might be, and it's slightly over, so it's an overspend of about £36,000, which in relative terms is quite good planning. You'll note as we work through the report, there's reference to Wern Hall, and I note the committee's previous interest in Wern Hall, and there is a forecast overspend, and there's in the report that you considered earlier tonight, there was a lot of different actions that the team are undertaking to try and reduce that overspend and make Wern Hall more sustainable going forward. Under point 18, just wanted to highlight the great work that the housing team are doing around getting additional housing benefit income for some of our service users. It's a great preventative way of working, so I just want to highlight that. Also just to highlight the 31,000 overspend on waste service transport, so it's where we have to hire a vehicle. Hopefully that will come down over time as we take on new bin wagons in 26-27, along with the overspend on postage costs as well, as we try and push towards more of an e-billing system. You'll note the 52,000 overspend due to shortfall in trade waste income compared to budget, and partly this reflects when we've put our prices up, because we had to. There was some business that we did lose, so Neil and the team are looking at how we can try and gain more business and make that more sustainable in the long run. It's worth noting as well at the top of page 78, the extended producer responsibility grant that we received from government. We did receive more than we expected, so we've put that 308,000 into the general reserve pot. Transfers reserves. You'll note under point 23, there's reference to net overspend on utilities, one reference to car parks, and the increased surface water. It might be worth of interest to the committee that the Cabinet will be looking at a proposal around car parks later in the week of how we can try and move to a more sustainable model to try and combat some of this overspend. It's also worth pointing out on a little bit further down that there's something around the reduction in rental income for Moss Side Community Centre due to no bookings. Now, we looked in, or Neil looked into this, and it was a coding error. So when they've actually gone back and looked at that, there are bookings. So it's just a coding error. So I do apologise that that's kind of transpired into the report. You'll also note that the minimum revenue provision has gone down, and that's due to the kind of reprofiling of the capital programme, which we'll come on to later. So I will leave it there, and thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Just on what you've said on the trade waste, there's some lost. Do we know where that's going to? I just aware that if we're not collecting it, is somebody authorised collecting it? Do we know that, or is it even going to be fly tipped? Do we have any indications?
So my understanding is that it's generally gone to someone who can provide it on a more competitive rate. So they've gone to a different person in the market. It is one of these areas that isn't a statutory service. That's why we're looking at it to see how we can make it more viable. And ideally, it does, speaking to Neil, it does pay for itself and it pays for the staff. It doesn't necessarily contribute to some of the kind of wider costs of management and things like that in the organisation. Ideally, we'd like it to be, potentially it could be an income revenue as well, but we're not in that stage at the minute. So the team are working really hard on how we can try and get close to where we'd like to be. But as far as we're aware, people have gone to other competitors in the market, so it's not a risk of such a fly tipping.
Yeah, I just wondered whether we did any monitoring of that, as even gone back and saying, can you tell us why you moved and who your new supplier is, because we do have the last thing we want is stuff going where it shouldn't be going.
I don't have specifics on where they moved to. I know obviously in terms of the contracts that we did lose, they're generally businesses in the area, so it tends to be, we do know that they moved to a rival, and there are quite a number of suppliers in the market for trade waste, so it is a competitive area. I think it is slightly a consequence of, as Councillor Roberts said, we benchmarked our fee against providers, so there's the potential for that to always happen, and it's about the service looking at ways to win back that business now.
Thank you. If we can move on to a question from David Bollenberg at the top of our page 5.
Hi. On page 74, the first paragraph 9 of the executive summary, it mentions that there's an overspend of 247,000. The committee are interested in how robust you feel the council's budgeting process is, and are there any areas you feel where we could improve in that process?
So, my insight, kind of insight into this has kind of been new to Pulse relatively, is we're in quite a strong position as a council. I think predominantly a lot of the kind of overspend has come on the property side of property and planning, generally due to assuming we're going to have more income from places like the Surrey Centre or from Burn Hall, and also the rents, so rents of kind of investments that are kind of due to be going out shortly. I've been in touch with the team this week around the list of vacated properties that are not completely filled, and within I'd say probably over half of the list, they're either in train to be filled, or they're with legal or things like that. So the team are working quite vigorously to make sure we're doing that, and the word and whole stuff as well. The team are doing quite a lot of work around that. So if I'm allowed to stray into it a little bit, I think because it kind of builds on the kind of where's the strength and how do we kind of build I don't think it's an issue around modelling as such. I think it's kind of a thing of we want to get somewhere. It's taken a little bit longer to get there than we'd like, but what are we doing to prevent to get there quicker? So in terms of on Word and Hall, there's different things like bringing the bar back in house. They think that'd be more financially viable. There's new staff that are implementing lots of different things. Example, marketing events and marketing kind of brochures, and having open days to try and gain more bookings. So, and now obviously we've got the chamber built. This would free up this room as well to be allowed out to rent out. So things are moving in the right direction. Hopefully, as we move through the quarters, the kind of overspends will decrease. Hopefully, equal out, but decrease.
Councillor King, you had a subsidiary.
Just to clarify, and that was all actually really interesting information. But the question was more about, I think, the modelling, and I noticed you'd say there isn't a problem with the modelling. Is there no problem with the modelling, or do we feel that somehow there are improvements to be made around some of the things that you mentioned, such as how do we mitigate in the modelling rather than the income for the vacant properties?
I think Neil has done a great job with the team, especially on the capital side, with looking at the modelling and really working hard with the teams to see what's realistic and what's deliverable. But Neil might want to come in and talk about if he thinks he's got any concerns.
I mean, in terms of budgeting you can always improve. I think there is always that comment. I think it's set at a point in time, which is obviously it's approved by council in February or March, but often we're working on these figures. Well, we are working on those figures from now onwards. So it's fairly normal. We produce management accounts because there will be variances from budget. I think in terms of specific areas, I think you mentioned the vacant units. I think that's about putting in savings, putting in that kind of stretch that was talked about a little bit earlier for teams to kind of push that momentum in the service area. We do budget on a realistic. We try to be as realistic as possible when we present it there. There's always things that we pick up during the year and go, we'll feed that into the next budget cycle. We could do this differently. But I think in terms of overall variance from the 17 million net budget, it's not out of kilter that I would suggest that we've got budgeting completely wrong.
Councillor King?
Yeah, my question is on page 75, paragraph 16, which is just trying to understand how we managed to under-egg the labour increase so drastically. We have popped into here a number of 3% that we've provided for. However, this year we've seen 6.7% increase and a 1.2% increase in labour costs for national minimum wage. And on average, people are being paid 6% more year on year. I know we don't have a crystal ball, but the year before we had data to say 7.7% increase in the national minimum wage, and an average worker gets a 5% increase. So I was just wondering, why are we working to a 3% increase for staff when we know that labour costs are rising much faster than that?
Just in respect to the 3% figure, that is specifically in relation to pay award, and obviously the pay award was announced after the budget was set at 3.2%. Increases like national insurance rises and things like that are factored into the budget separately, so that's not within that 3.2% comparison. They were budgeted for as they were announced, so they were factored into the budget from day one. So the comparison here is between what we didn't know at the time, which was the local government pay award, and what was actually budgeted for, which was 3% and 3.2%.
I do appreciate that, but the previous years, and also as well, this isn't just 2 years, there's multiple years data all to say that 3% would be a huge underestimation of what actual increases in labour costs. So I'm just interested. I appreciate what you've said on national insurance. We couldn't have foreseen that increase. However, we had seen higher than 3% consistently prior to that in terms of an average worker, and also in the national minimum wage. So I'm interested to know, how is it that we try to reach that number? How is it that we budget for it?
So I work in the public sector as well, and I think last year we were pretty, being 3.5%. The year before was maybe a bit more. I think we over budgeted last year and put it at 5%, and it was less. So I don't think we're too out of kilter. And it definitely between the years of 2010 and whatever, until we got back in, the pay rise was quite flatlined. So it's not. I don't think we're unrealistic in kind of what we're putting in the papers, and it's always a bit of guesswork, isn't it? We're not in control of what they agree, but I think Neil and his team has done a pretty good job for the past 2 years in particular in trying to tweak that out.
Councillor King, are you? Yeah. Councillor Howarth.
Thank you, Chair. Page 76, the second bullet point is an overspend on Worden Hall. Could you tell us how this income target was arrived at, first of all? And secondly, there have been issues with generating income with Worden Hall since it was refurbished. You mentioned that you've looked at bringing the bar back in-house, that people have tried a few things to try and generate bookings. That sounds more like hope than expectation. So what business strategy is actually in place for Worden Hall?
Obviously, the committee have shown interest at Worden Hall. A couple of times I've been here. Councillor Farnworth and the team with Caroline behind are doing quite a lot of work. I think they might be quite helpful there was a paper that Cabinet received, kind of a leaders brief around Wordenhall and some of the kind of changes. And I think it might be worth us trying to share a bit more detail with the committee around that, because I think we really are trying to do some things to get to where we both want to be, and it's just around the speed. So they've got a list of events that are coming up throughout the Christmas period and the autumn that are working really hard. There's been some new appointments in the team, and they brought this type of expertise that we've never had before in the council, and it really is transformational in the sense of the approach and the speed that we're trying to go at, that is previous to their arrival. So that's credit to the great recruitment we've done. The part of that paper, which I can't go into all of it now because I can't remember it, but part of it was around how much the benchmarking of our venue costs, and they did an enormous amount of work looking at different venues, in particular wedding venues in the area, to make sure that we were not only make sure that we could competitive, because obviously there is an element of downfall in the sense of some venues have accommodation on site, we don't, but it's kind of thinking about them things of, well, have you thought around getting a coach to this hotel? Do you want this? And this new appointments are kind of really trying to have a client-focused approach about this, kind of, especially on the weddings front, about kind of making it your special day. But there's also an element of diversifying in terms of bringing the community space, which was up on the top floor and not really accessible, down into the atrium to try and get more bookings that way. And there's other things around potentially buying or purchasing tech equipment, conference style equipment, to try and attract a different audience there as well. So Neil might want to come in and talk about some of the other things that have been done, but there was a plan in place, and it was quite clear we weren't necessarily meeting them targets that we'd like to. With this kind of reset and different interventions that the team have come up with, we're still trying to stretch and get more bookings, because we want to see it used. The leader's been really clear in saying that we want to see Wordenhall busy and used. So I am confident with this new approach and kind of different mitigations we put in place that we will get there, hopefully quicker, and like we both like to see.
So you've had an overspend. How was the income target arrived at? And it's great you're having these brainstorming sessions, but have you actually got a business strategy in place? Those were the two questions.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I don't think we're having brainstorming sessions. I don't think that brainstorm is a politically correct term, but I'll leave that there. Neil, do you want to come in?
So the budget is a historic one, the income target for the budget, which was when the first income model was done for Worden, which goes back a number of years. We haven't changed that income target during the budget setting over the last few years, because there's always been the understanding that there will come forward some element of business plan to achieve that target. Now, obviously, the plan coming forward now has got that as a target to try and achieve within the budget. It may be less, it may be more than that, and that'll be looked at as part of that development of the business case there. But I don't think we've seen anything from the department internally that suggests that in the long run, if the things come to fruition, that they can't achieve that target. Certainly that's been the initial discussions with the department from a pure finance discussion on budget terms.
So there is a business strategy then?
I think this is what I was alluding to earlier, Councillor, around there are quite strong things that underpin this approach, and I think that we could do a better job of trying to share that with the committee in a form that's suitable, to try and give you some more understanding around that.
Well, a straight answer would be a good point.
So was there a question, or
have you completed the question? Yeah, thank you. Again, from the chair, looking back on the history of this isn't the first time we've had a reset, as it were, taken on stuff and so on. So that does seem to indicate that we perhaps didn't have the resources we needed when the refurbishment took place to achieve the objectives that we hoped to achieve in terms of income generation for the refurbished premises. Would that be fair?
I think it's a fair thing to say that there was obviously a plan to refurbish the building, but the operational underneath it, the operational platform underneath wasn't necessarily as thorough as we would have liked to see, and we're in more of a confidence space that it is now. But I'd like to share some more details with the committee to try and help, show some more transparency around it.
Thank you. In addition, I need to say that the feedback from citizens of Leyland about Worden Park and its renewal has been entirely positive. I've not had a single negative comment made to me. So clearly it's impressing members of the public, but we cannot, obviously the objective is to achieve financial stability for it. And we would be grateful for some more comments. You talked about a paper that was circulated to Cabinet. Maybe you can amend that suitably for it to be circulated to members of Scrutiny. Councillor Howarth.
Fortunately, it's me again. On page 76, the fourth bullet point, music in the park. Could you talk us through the music in the park overspend of £11,000 when the event is already subsidised by the council? And can the cost of music in the park be sustained in the future?
So I'll let Neil speak to the detail in the report, and then I'll pick up the second part of the question.
So in respect to the budget, it was 11,000 compared to budget, but we did budget an amount of money for that. So it was around 115,000 net cost to the council overall.
So in terms of the future of Music in the Park, there has been a press release or some type of public information that Music in the Park won't be going ahead in the future. In terms of, I'm sure that's good news to some people. I can see Councillor King smiling. Ultimately, it was a project post-COVID that we set out on a 5-year plan, or the administration did on a 5-year plan to try and make it cost neutral. For the first 3 years, there was increase in ticket sales and decrease in costs to the council. I think for various reasons this year, which is not alone to this council, but other providers are finding that there's less appetite and less disposable income to buy tickets, and also the cost of putting these things has increased. So whilst we, as an administration, sad to see it go, the focus is going to be on the future culture strategy and delivering other things that benefit the borough.
Thank you. Has anybody got?
Just to clarify from my side, I am in no way delighted that this is cancelled. I think there's a lot of businesses that hugely depend on it, so it's not good news that we've not managed to get it financially viable. But I just want to point that out, that there's no signal from me that I think this is in any way good news.
Thank you, Councillor King. I mean, from my own experience with another festival that I help, not just at a basic level, there's a lot of festivals gone out of business over the last 2 years. Some of the one I help by putting white lines down on fields has dropped its size from a license of 20,000 to 6.5, and cut all its costs as far as it possibly can. So we're not alone in this. I'm glad to see some planning from the council, from the cabinet about that. Clearly the losses were unsustainable. Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thanks, Chairman. Can I take you to page 79, Councillor Roberts, paragraph 23, the fifth bullet point near to the bottom of the page. You made reference to clarifying the point about Moss Side Community Centre earlier, so I won't ask you about that. But moving on, there's also a reference to Civic Conference Centre rental consistently underperforming on its income target. How are the targets actually arrived at?
So in respect to those targets, so we were generating the income to those level of targets in the past, and I think so that was achieved a number of years ago. So they'd basically been baseline from what income we were achieving prior. Obviously, as the ongoing works have gone on here, we've experienced that overspend. We don't expect that to continue in future years. So we do expect that the budget is correct, that we're just seeing a temporary blip in that, and we did historically achieve that kind of level of income.
Thank you. On page 80, just apologies if we've asked this before, and for clarification for those members of the public who might be viewing this, what is minimum revenue provision?
Don't think I did a good job last time when it was asked, so I'll get Neil to do this one. It might be more a straight answer.
See, I thought I was going to not explain it. So minimum revenue provision is essentially a uniquely local government provision that we are required by the SIPFA code to make provision within our revenue budgets for the repayment of borrowing, even if we don't have borrowing. So we have to make sure that we budget for sufficient to repay effectively what would be the principal on any loan. So if you think of about it in those terms, we have to make budget provision sufficient for that annually. And the reason why it's an underspend is because the capital programme, which we'll come on to see a little bit later, slipped a bit further than we expected, which meant we over provided in the budget at that time.
Thank you. I think I'm clear on that. We don't have any debts, so we don't. Do we need to make a provision?
So we don't have any debts, but we are legally required to make a provision, and it's essentially put in place to stop local government basically going into debt without the ability to repay that debt. Essentially, it's saying you must make this provision because if you're committing to this, you should make provision in your budget for this, even if you're using your working cash balances to finance it.
Councillor Bollenberg.
So if you don't have debt, but you have to make provision, what is that provision set at?
So the provision set by, there's various formulas. It's actually within the budget report that we produce annually, the minimum revenue provisions statement actually details the calculation that we do alongside it. It's generally related to the asset life that you've borrowed against. So, for example, if we did a piece of work on a building, that building has a 50-year asset life, it would usually be the value of that works spread over 50 years. So there's usually some calculation behind it to those kind of effects.
I think we're a little clearer than we were.
Just worth pointing out, Shirley, I think that there's some Treasury Management member training in the new year, which I'm sure will be of interest to us all.
Thank you very much. David Bollenberg.
Hi again. If I can take you to page 89, there's the reserves table is there, and I'm not sure. It's about the 7th item down. It's the apprentice, graduate and trainee posts where you've got a reserve of 145,000. The committee is really interested to find out, have you got any plans to use that to recruit young people, given the council's commitment to enhancing the opportunities for young people?
I absolutely hope there is a plan. Now, whether Neil can talk about it or whether we'd have to get a written response from HR. Yeah, go for it.
I can add a little bit on this. I mean, in terms of commitment to spend the money, there's no current commitment on that resource. I think what's tended to happen with particularly, and I can speak for my own service on this, we have a number of graduate trainees, a number of apprentices. They've tended to be in vacant posts. They've been put into permanent posts and been resourced through that permanent post that's been budgeted there. I think we move much more towards that. In terms of training costs, that's been largely picked up by the apprenticeship levy. Now, there are some changes coming to the ability to charge things to the apprenticeship levy, which may mean we need to dip into this in future if we need to still support some individuals. But I think what has generally happened across the organisation is there's been more of a move to putting apprentices and graduates in permanently budgeted posts.
Content? Yep.
I'd be really interested in finding out how many apprentices and trainee posts, I suppose, and graduates, but mainly the apprentices we have within the council. I realise you want that information now, but if you could provide that, it'd be interesting to know how many we have, how it's going, and again, what are the plans for the future with the apprentices?
Yeah, we'll provide written feedback on that.
Thank you very much. Any members of the council who are not on the committee would want to make any questions? Councillor Tomlinson.
Can I just, as you'll know, I was lucky enough to have Councillor Roberts' portfolio. Can I just acknowledge that on Worden Hall, the council has struggled, and we have to be honest with that. I think We did have a great plan for refurbishing the building. It was a grade 2 listed building that we owned. We couldn't just ignore it. But then I think, just to be honest, we did struggle with how we were going to run it once, it went with the museum service at one stage. And then we appointed somebody and they didn't stay very long. I think Councillor Roberts mentioned the staff that we've got now feels to me like it's a much better fit for running a commercial operation out of there. I've always said we would want it to wash its own face in terms of costs, and that remains the aspiration. But I think it's really healthy just to acknowledge that we've struggled with it. And on music in the park, I'm as disappointed as anybody, but there just comes a time when you have to acknowledge that the amount of subsidy an event, however much the 3,000 or 4,000 people who attend think it's wonderful, that is taxpayers' money, and you can't just. I used to go to Highest Point Festival in Lancaster, quite a big event that's been cancelled. There was an event in Accrington at the football stadium that was cancelled after they'd started selling tickets, and they had to give people refunds. So this is a trend that's going on at the moment. Cost of artists has gone through the roof, and people are less likely to spend that money. So we just decided to bite the bullet. Can I give the committee some reassurance that some of that money that we've used to subsidise music in the park will be repurposed to support the cultural strategy? So that money in terms of spending on the cultural life of the borough is not going to disappear. But we can't. I couldn't justify standing up in full council in a couple of months saying we're going to do it all again. The definition of madness is to carry on doing the same things time and time again and expect a different result, isn't it? And so we took the decision as a cabinet to bite the bullet and bow to the inevitable, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlinson. It obviously was a difficult decision, but I think it's probably the right decision. And any other questions? Thank you for there's no members of the public. Thank you for Councillor Roberts and Neil Holton for your presence and for your work. Have we got recommendations that we can formulate?
Thank you, Chair. Some of the themes from tonight's discussion that the committee might like to recommend. The committee thanks the Cabinet Member and Director for attending and answering questions. The committee welcomes the offer of a copy of the commercial strategy for Worden Hall following recent staff appointments and looks forward to the overspend being mitigated in future. The committee asks for further information on the apprenticeship reserve and the council's approach to apprentices across the council. Thank you, Chair.
Are members of the committee happy with those? Yes, thank you. We welcome Councillor Roberts again with Neil Holton, the officer involved, for the capital and balance sheet monitoring report on Q1, which is item 7 on our agendas. Would you like to make any comments, Councillor Roberts?
Yeah, I'll be brief, but thank you very much, Chair. It sets out the capital position of the council as of 31st of July. It's worth noting the biggest thing under key issues. So the council capital investment programme for 25-26 has reduced significantly from 43 million to 24 million to round. Now, if you turn over to page 93, that big table 2 there shows you where the reprofiling has happened. Now, I guess you could spin this in different ways if you wanted to. On one hand, I think this committee and governance committee have always asked us to be more transparent and honest with our profiling but when we're going to actually spend money. You could spin it as delays, but it's just around, the difference of this could be spending money at the end of March to the beginning of April. So it's just being transparent. As you go through I'll just make a few points on page 95. In terms of the town deal, this financial year we'll focus on Quinn Street and the market, and then the spend for future next year will be future areas of that project. And then there's just a bit of an explanation around kind of the contract procurement, the Penwether Master Plan, and awarding of that, which we hope to tie up at the end of this year, with work starting early next year. And one thing that was unavoidable regarding St Mary's Penwether churchyard, which we're statutorily required to do, and unfortunately you can't really know the extent of the work until you start doing it, and at that point you've got some human remains that are open when you've started, and you've got to, so there was an urgent decision made to carry on with that work. And point 34, just around kind of, we are going to be purchasing some new vehicles, and we expect them to arrive in early April. So we've just reprofiled money, 300 grand from this financial year to next. Borrowing is nil, even though we do account for our borrowing, as we've already talked about, and business rates and council rate collections are up from this time in previous years. Generally speaking, we're in a good place. It's Q1, and we'll see what the year brings. But I welcome comments and questions from committee, and I'll try and be as transparent, as helpful as I can.
Thank you very much. Just a comment on St Mary's graveyard. Members of the public listening to this may not realise that the local council has a responsibility immediately after the closure of any burial ground. So if it's been a burial ground operated by any other operator, once it's closed, it transfers responsibility to the local borough. And dealing with graveyards is a very sensitive matter for obvious reasons. Particularly historic ones, and we had a wall that was needing remedying work to be safe, but behind that wall we never know what's there, hence the work that needed doing. But thank you for mentioning that. On page 92, paragraph 10 and 11, you've already mentioned this a little bit. Why in June Cabinet increased the capital budget to 43.9 million and it's now been decreased to 25? Oh, I think you said 24.
So I think it was the end of year position. So we kind of had to put a figure on it. And then as we've gone into Q1, then we can look at profile into the next year. But Neil, if you want to add or expand, I appreciate it's quite a big difference, but it's just trying to, I know before Neil does say so, Neil and his team have done a huge amount of work, and Neil has pushed the team to try and get figures that are really accurate and transparent, so that it's a great piece of work, but I'm sure Neil can tell you more.
Without explaining MRP again, it does slightly link back to the revenue side of things. I think we have taken a policy, and I think this is possibly answering a little bit of the question in terms of improvements in budgeting as well. We have taken a policy to provide for the capital programme earlier, which means that we provide sufficient in the revenue budget to fund that capital programme. I think challenge from this committee, actually external auditors and others have said the realism in that needs to be reflected now, and I think partly the reason why the June report didn't quite reflect that was we were still going through the external audit completion, and there were still external audit recommendations coming through. So there was an element of it in waiting for the fullness of those recommendations to reflect it. As Councillor Roberts says, we've sat with property this time, we've gone through reprofiling, we've gone when is realistic and been tried to be as challenging as possible on that, and that's resulted in that change. I wouldn't anticipate this level of change again now. I mean, we couldn't because of the size of the programme remaining. I will not sit and say there won't be slippage in future in the programme and change it, because that would be unrealistic. But certainly of this scale, this was a reflection of kind of the various recommendations that we've had to go out and be truly realistic over the next few years of the timing of spend, which was probably always the reality anyway.
Thank you. Can I just make a comment on page 93 about the presentation of the report? The table at the top of the page does not really fit equalities. It is not, when you move from needing reading glasses to a microscope, it really is not helpful. So if you could take a note for whoever's putting these documents together that they need to be readable to the average person of my age, who is, well, anybody over 50 is likely to need reading glasses, and it is a very small typeface on that one. But thank you. Just a comment. I move to Councillor Green.
Thanks, Chairman. Just picking up on this point. So when we set a budget, it's only ever a point in time, of course. But time and again, Scrutiny receives these reports, and the capital programme sees slippage, significant reprofiling, etc. And this is a case in point. So Q1, and there's massive slippage and reprofiling. How, moving forwards, can this council actually manage this process better? How can we be realistic?
Neil might be able to say more about the external audit and what they've said. It'd be interesting to see their perspective, because obviously it's a really valued friend, isn't it? External audit and internal audit. But I think it's better to be transparent and be upfront about it, rather than holding on to it and then we come to Q4 again and, oh, there you go. We've now changed everything. We're just trying to do the right thing and show that. But it'd be interesting to see what external audit have to say.
I mean, I think a couple of points. I think there's two types of capital scheme to me. There's a predictable one when you're on site delivering that scheme. Generally, we have cash flows from contractors at that point. We can reasonably predict it. Obviously, there's always things that can go wrong. I think when you take a scheme like the town deal, for example, which had so many changes, there's a lot of fees in the initial part. It's very hard to know the cash flow profile of that scheme until it's really up to date. Now, I think we could have been more realistic about saying this isn't realistically going to happen in these financial years. But until you're on site spending the money month on month, it's very hard to predict. And I think the contrast I would give is with Jubilee Gardens, where when we got on site and we had a predictable cash flow, it was fairly easy to profile the budget. Now, I'm not eliminating ourselves from saying this is our attempt to enact what you've just described. It's us saying we are going to work with property, be very clear on timescales, be challenging on timescales, and say, is this realistic? And in future, I would really hope that you don't see these kind of huge slippages, because it should be reflective of the programme.
Thank you very much. I think we have the same objectives. Are any members of the council who are not members of the committee, do you have any questions on this? Thank you. Do we have some recommendations formulated?
Thank you, Chair. Potential recommendations include: the committee thanks the Cabinet member for attending and answering questions with the Director. The committee is grateful for the reassurance that the timing of capital spend would be more realistic in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Are you content, committee? Thank you. Thank you to Councillor Roberts and Neil Holton for your presence and your clear presentation. We're grateful for your time. Welcome to Councillor Colin Sharples, Cabinet Member for Planning and Licensing, who will present the report of the on the Scrutiny Review of Building Better Homes and Neighbourhoods update, supported by Gail Wotton, Director of Planning and Property, and Ben Vickers, Planning and Policy Team Leader. Do you have any opening comments that you wish to make?
I've no doubt I'll find something to say. Good evening. Proud to be here tonight to report on the work of the Scrutiny Review into Building Better Homes and Neighbourhoods. Can I just start with saying I do realise the task group have been thanked on a number of occasions, but I would like to take this opportunity personally as portfolio holder to thank Councillor Green, who chaired that, and As you call Unsworth, Walton, and Jackson, would you pass on my thanks to them? I think also as well, it's very opportune. I thought this review when it was done, because it took place, and immediately afterwards we had the MPPF government consultation on planning reform, so it was handy for that. And then of course this year, Gail and her team are absolutely knee deep in Central Lancashire local plan, and that was very handy because the recommendations came in for that as well. They were able to consider the task group's recommendations when we submitted a representation on a draft MPPF consultation, which I think was last year, wasn't it? And of course, this year we were able to incorporate the committee's recommendation within the draft of the emerging Central Lancashire local plan. And I think I'm right in saying I've got this, Chair. I'm pleased to report that all recommendations from the scrutiny review into building better homes and neighbourhoods have now been fully addressed. I think there was 11 altogether, and 2 of them we couldn't accept because they affected SIL and Section 106 monies. And then at an earlier update, there were 3 others that were actioned, completed. That just left 6. So we've just got the 6 that I'm saying have now been fully addressed. The review has had a meaningful impact. Its findings have helped shape the emerging Central Lancashire local plan, influenced our response to national planning reforms, and strengthened our approach to housing standards and design of development across South Ribble. We've seen tangible progress from the inclusion of minimum space standards and climate change policies in the draft local plan, to improved working relationships between planning and building control, and the rollout of body cameras for enforcement officers. I'd like to thank the task group and officers for their thorough work and commitment to delivering on the recommendations, and I'm satisfied that the review has been successfully concluded and that the council is now well positioned to deliver better homes and stronger communities for our residents. I think it just shows how important that review was, Michael. Really good. And I'm now happy to take questions with the caveat, Chair, that being relatively new to this portfolio and wishing to afford you all the best possible answers, I will almost deflect your questions in those directions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Green.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Sharples, and thank you, Gail and Ben, for coming this evening. Councillor Sharples, thank you very much for the kind comments to the task group. I will pass those on. A tremendous amount of work went into it by Councillors Unsworth, Jackson, Councillor Walton, who I think is on the call this evening, and also our officers. So Darren, and I think Darren from memory, it was Coral that very ably supported that group. And we came up with these recommendations, trying to achieve the outcome of getting better homes for residents. And I think we were very much supported by lots of other members who came and gave evidence, in particular mention to Councillor Flannery, who was the relevant cabinet member at that time, and gave really good supporting comments. One of the key recommendations, whilst I accept the majority of them have been accepted and a couple weren't accepted by cabinet, I understood the reasons at the time why they weren't accepted. Might have taken a different view, but nevertheless, we are where we are. But picking up on probably the key recommendation from the task group was this development of a charter accreditation scheme, i.e. recommendation number 1. Now, notwithstanding the point that Councillor Sharples has just made, that all the recommendations have been, apart from the 2 that we said, all the rest have been accepted and acted upon, I don't feel that this one has. And this was the key one, and it was unanimous cross-party support as a way of moving things forward. And it was very much the idea of, rather than a race to the bottom, a race to the top, to encourage developers that are going to be building houses for the foreseeable future in South Ribble. We knew that a local plan was about to come into place. We were expecting more houses to be built in this area. It is an area which has significant demand for housing, but we wanted to achieve better outcomes for residents in terms of the quality of houses in so many different ways, from sizes, environmental requirements, various standards. I'm not going to go into those now, but they're referenced in the report. But this hasn't been dealt with. Now, at the time, after the recommendations were accepted by Cabinet and Council, officers did say that obviously there was a capacity issue in terms of dealing with the local plan, which was fully understood at the time. But we've now moved on from that. Significant work has been done to get that local plan into a position where it could be submitted. That has been submitted. Nevertheless, now is probably the time then to look at this charter accreditation scheme and to make sure that this council works towards getting this in place. I'm just wondering what the position is now and how quickly can we see this charter accreditation scheme being worked up and being implemented so that we can encourage developers to get on board with that. And as I say, get that race to the top. Whereas if I'm a developer and I see that Will as another company, he's in the scheme, I want my company to be in that scheme as well, so I can offer the same standards to people who are looking to buy or rent properties in the borough, so that we can push up those standards moving forwards. Thank you.
Councillor Green. I'll be honest, I've not been party to these conversations before, so appreciate that I'm here to answer questions. I suppose I would seek a bit of clarification on how you think this charter would be different to the design policies in the local plan and the follow-up design codes that we would write as part after the local plan is adopted.
I'll come in on that point because that was in my question. I think we've done it, but in a different way. So as you'll be aware from any discussions in terms of planning committee, it is the planning policies by which we can refuse or accept planning proposals. And if we were to introduce something that doesn't have weight, and I'll come back to that point in a minute, it can be challenged in terms of our decision making. So what I think the team have done, and I think Ben's point, is that we've actually built that into the policies to make sure that it is meaningful in terms of the discussions and the decisions that the council has, rather than having something that is kind of aspirational that sits alongside, that some developers might join an accreditation scheme, but a lot of developers will think, well, how do we get out of this? So by putting into the local plan some of the design principles, elements around space standards, for example, the text talks about moving for supplementary planning documents as well. Again, they can have weight in terms of their decision-making process. I think we've done that, but one better in relation to actually having guidance policy that can be enforced in the planning decisions that we make.
The only other point I'd make, Councillor Green and Chair, is that the design codes that we there will be a legal requirement to prepare design codes as part of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. So this is writing design is something that will be inevitable. It will be an obligation by law. So this charter will need to find a sort of space that isn't otherwise occupied by local plan policy and design codes. And at the moment, I'm not clear what that is.
Thank you. Thanks for that response. And I'm pleased to see that lots of this has been included in our local plan moving forwards and will be able to be implemented. But it was very much a bolt on to that, was the thinking by the task group, in the same way as you might have requirements on safety in a car, but certain cars will have different safety requirements. And it's by different manufacturers offering different standards that you get that race upwards in terms of standards. And it is voluntary, but behind that there's a badge that attaches to it. If I want to build houses in South Hibble and there's other developers that are offering a 5-star service, I want my company to have 5 stars as well. So I will offer those additional requirements which may not legally be absolutely compulsory, may not be an absolute requirement of our local plan, but are seen as best practice for developers in South Ribble. And in that way, we will push up those standards and deliver better outcomes for both the current residents in South Ribble, but importantly, the new people who are going to be buying properties in the future. That was very much the thinking behind it. And it's that I don't think we have satisfied. And I would certainly like to see us do so moving forward. And I'm sure I have not spoken to my colleagues on the former task group recently about this point, but we're very much all of the same opinion that is what they wanted to see moving forward, which was accepted at the time by Cabinet and Council.
So I think if this is something that the committee wants us to take away and come back on, there are two things I could offer. One is that I think we could do a bit of a review of the accreditation schemes that are already out there for developers, because as you say, there are some that will be working to that standard anyway. In order to try and identify, as Ben was talking about, the space in which a South Ribble accreditation scheme could operate that is different to anything else. And I think the other point that we could commit to is around the publicising of the design codes, space standards that are in the local plan. The local plan is a long document. I'm sure some of us in the room have read it from start to finish. But perhaps what we could do is actually spell that out in terms of a guidance document for developers in terms of what our policies are already requiring. So I think those two things, if Councillor Sharples was happy, we could commit to doing if the committee were minded to support that.
Thank you for those responses. As somebody who wasn't involved in this, I can see the response is we've already got these high standards. Builders know about them. There are other schemes of accreditation. I suppose I would like to see a response that says, yes, we do want to see builders, developers in South Ribble on schemes that we approve achieve standards that are higher than the legal minima that we have in our development plan. And I don't know quite what the best way of doing this is. This is one said to be one possible option, but I can see from the planning point of view that there are legal limitations. I think this goes beyond planning as to the aspirations of the council in terms of well-being of our citizens, that we achieve better than the legal minima. And I think the question of how we do that perhaps needs some further conversation. But from what I've listened to this evening and read, I think there is space for some further thought about this, because we would like to be better than other areas, not just as good as. And that, I mean, it's carrots and sticks in a way, that the planning level just gives us a level playing field on which a development may occur. And we all know that builders will build to their own financial profit margins. And therefore we do need those legal minima. The question of how we achieve better than that, which is what I think the Charter is trying to achieve, is perhaps still up in the air and unanswered.
Hi there, Chair. This was something that one of my previous employers did, and it was at Camden in London, and it was a design awards scheme. So it would, I mean, it does what it says on the tin, really. So it was an annual ceremony, publicised in local media. So if there was a completion of a particularly good building, then that would win a specific local authority award at Camden. The purpose of that was to, sort of showcase good design. Good design can happen in this borough, and ultimately this is what can be achieved. I'm just throwing that out as a suggestion of something I've done before. Yeah.
We obviously can't do this work in the committee at this stage. It's getting quite late in the evening, but I wonder if you could. I mean, that does sound an option. We know that next door the extra care facility has got an award for stuff, and whether there is scope for a borough award might be a way forward of giving people the incentive to do better than the minimum. So I would encourage you, if you wouldn't mind, to do a little bit more working on that and see whether we can develop something that encourages people to do more than the minimum. Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? There are no members of the council who are not on the committee who are here, so can we go to the recommendations, please?
Thank you, Chair. The committee might like to recommend the committee thanks the Cabinet Member, Director and Team Leader for attending and answering questions. The committee is grateful for the response and actions taken following the scrutiny review. The committee welcomes the offer of promoting the design codes more and exploring possible accreditation schemes to help raise house building standards in the borough. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Green.
Happy to support all those recommendations. I'm just wondering whether a further report needs to come back to scrutiny at some point, because this was the final report, and I'd feel more comfortable if something else came back, if we put a time on that.
Of what a reasonable timescale might be.
I'm not absolutely certain what it is you want us to report on further. The discussion we had at the end of this one, you want to further report on that, do you?
I think the suggestion is that the response to recommendation 1 needs a little more work, and we're asking if you could do that and come back to us with, if what is suggested in resolution 1 is not adequate, we have your report back saying various things are already done, and the question I think from the working group is how can we actually achieve higher than those legal minimum? Is that, and you've already Benjamin, you've given us an idea on where we might go with that, and we'd be grateful if you could do some more thinking on that and come back to us in 3 months.
My only concern with that is because it does relate a lot to the local plan and the policies. So as you know, we're going through the examination process there. What I think I'd like to do is clarify what the standards the local plan is going to achieve. It feels to be an assumption that that's a minimum. Actually, that's pushing the boundary. We are putting in our policies very high standards in terms of design. That's got to be tested through the examination process, which will take the best part of the next year. So I think in order, and I'm not trying to be difficult on this, but in order to give the better indication of the standards that are going to come through the local plan, that needs to be tested through the examination process, which will be about a year's time. It is at that point then we could start thinking about, well, what else could potentially be achieved through an accreditation scheme. Now, that does feel like an awfully long time to be suggesting to scrutiny members, but that is the honest opinion in terms of a meaningful engagement about what an accreditation scheme could potentially deliver. It really does need to be based on what are we actually going to be getting through our emerging local plan in terms of those design policies now. We can come back to you in 3 months in terms of what we've proposed in that the version that's gone to examination now. But as you know, that's with the planning inspectors at the moment, and they won't report until a year from now as to whether those standards are going to hold or not. So there are a couple of options there. We can do something in the next few months if that's keen, the committee members are keen for that. But in terms of actually adding an accreditation scheme onto the council's sort of list of policies, it's not going to be meaningful until after the local plan's adopted.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you, Gail. I think what Gail is saying is actually perfectly reasonable. It's just I'm conscious we need to keep something on the agenda so it isn't lost in the midst of time. because obviously members change, officers change, and so on. It's important to keep it there. But I think what Gail was saying in terms of the timescale is quite reasonable, and given that we're going through the local plan process. So I think if conversations can continue, and if we can bring this back at some time through the scrutiny process, I'm quite flexible as to when we actually do bring it back. It's when we can add that real value.
So are members of the committee content with that? In which case I would thank the officers and the member of the Cabinet for your attendance. Grateful to that. Thank you very much. We have item 9 just to complete as members of the committee. So if you can just hang on 5 minutes. The resident engagement and democratic participation review, we've scoped out the meetings. You will have had invitations to those, people coming to speak to us and when we expect to report. So I hope that is you're happy with those. If you have David, you've got a comment.
Yeah, only to comment that I do find it quite farcical, really, that at the same time you're doing this work in how we can get greater resident engagement and democratic participation, there's a working group on governance deciding how we don't. Because their recommendations are that we stop the public from speaking, we stop councillors from asking questions, and clearly the left hand and the right hand are doing something completely different. And I have asked whether there's been any inter-engagement, if you like, as anybody coming up with these proposals that are now going to the next full council have engaged with yourself, and I suspect the answer is no, they haven't. So all of this excellent work that you're doing, and I know a number, and I've not been involved, but I know a number of you have, and you've spent a lot of time, put a lot of effort into this, just for a governance committee to make it pointless to me, or parts of it pointless.
The review might actually say that we would wish to report back on those changes of governance after the trial period of them, but I take your point. There hasn't been a conversation between myself and Chair of Governance about this, and I will undertake to make time for that conversation.
I could just very quickly come back, because I did raise this point at the governance meeting last week, which a number of us attended. And the perfect example of where I don't think they've particularly looked at this is that we had a scrutiny committee, not this one, but the external scrutiny committee, where we invited along United Utilities, we had the Environment Agency, we had the days in advance. So that any member of the public would have to submit a written question 2 days in advance of not having heard what those 3 external people have actually got to say. And that to me is a bit of a nonsense, really.
And you made that point to them. I think there's a bigger remit to this group than those items about governance on how the council is governed. So that the participation is beyond that. There have been some other areas in which we've looked in the past, for example, the development of the hubs, which seem to have stalled. So that there is a wider remit to this group, but I take your point.
I do appreciate that, and I do appreciate that it's a much wider remit. But if you start by closing down the public and closing down members, it's not the best starting point.
Yeah, I hear your point. Meetings and training. There is, as I've said at the beginning, there are some training courses coming up. If anyone would like to go to the one at Warwick University, Coventry, then my experience of that is very good. I think it wouldn't do us any harm if 2 or 3 or even more who wish to go went at the same time, but the dates will be circulated to you so that you can decide when you're free if you wish to go. The scrutiny meeting of the Northwest Strategic Network is on the 8th of October at 10 a.m. via Teams. Again, a helpful thing to be involved in if you have the time. I do understand that as a retired person, I have more time than those of you who are employed. The Cabinet Forward Plan, members are asked to flag up any Cabinet items they might be interested in considering, or whether anything that we might need to call in. And we're asked to review the Forward Plan for the remainder of the year, which we need to do as we come forward with that plan.
Would the changes to car parking fit into that remit?
If you want us to be able to scrutinise that particular thing, we can do that. Yep. Thank you for your presence. It's been a fairly long meeting. I'm sorry we had too many questions perhaps to ask, but I think Councillor Tomlinson did a good job of responding. And it is our job to ask those questions. So I think a valuable meeting. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the officers.